As global warming increases, are we losing the battle against ever-growing wildfires? 3 years after the unthinkable occurred on the Hawaiian island of Maui, more record-breaking fires hit Europe and North America. Can we prepare for worse to come with the El Nino climate pattern upon us, plus scorching temperatures and droughts ravaging our planet? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, this month, 3 years ago, the United States marked its deadliest wildfire in over a century on the tropical island of Maui. The images of people wading into the ocean to escape the flames shocked the world, and many believed we'd seen the worst. But a few months ago, another El Nino climate pattern arrived, adding to the intensity and unpredictability of severe weather across the planet. Now, it's gotten to the point where even certain fire suppression methods are backfiring. And we've entered a miserable cycle of more fires creating more carbon, which leads to hotter temperatures that create more fires. Here's a look now at the consequences and whether we can even prepare for what's to come.
This August marks 3 years since the deadliest US wildfires in over a century. The Maui fires in the state of Hawaii devastated local communities, wildlife, and killed over 100 people. The military was eventually called in to help with aerial water bombing in an island state normally lush and humid. This year, further north, wildfires sweep across parts of Western Canada. Huge blazes destroy homes and force evacuations in British Columbia, near Canada's Pacific coast.
Fire went from 50 hectares to 400 to 1,000 to 5,000, like within 2 or 3 hours. And what was once 15 kilometers away is now right here at the hill.
An ocean away, Europe is facing the reality of longer, hotter, drier summers. Sustained lack of rainfall and prolonged heat waves across much of the continent have created tinder dry conditions. In June, July and August, firefighters battle enormous infernos in Spain. Portugal, Albania and Greece are also fighting extensive fires. And in France, the country experienced some of the worst wildfires in living memory.
We must understand that we are facing a completely unprecedented wildfire. The situation we are dealing with today is the most severe we have ever recorded, the toughest since the Second World War. More than 160,000 hectares have already burned, and the season is far from over.
The heat is having such a big impact on Europe that it's beginning to affect the economy in surprising ways. Retailers are experiencing an air conditioning sales boom. It's even affecting real estate sales.
It is too hot. People feel as though they are suffocating in there, and there is no way to get any fresh air other than installing air conditioning. So, for now, it is still on the market.
AC has even become a political issue in France. Opinions are divided on whether it now is a necessity for human health and comfort in places like schools and hospitals, or whether increased AC places huge demands on electricity grids, and if the hot air that exterior vents on AC units pump outdoors could have an urban heat island effect in cities and dense areas. In London, a city usually infamous for its grey sky and wet weather, an abnormal summer has turned normally green parks a dry, dusty brown.
Do not put disposable barbecues on sale at this moment in time. They have been the cause of significant fires.
The UK government says almost 3/4 of England is now in drought, the driest July in England and Wales in 190 years. Across the continent, canals have had to be closed. As water levels drop on rivers, long sunken reminders of the past show themselves again. Hungary even had to shut down a nuclear power plant. The Hungarian PM explaining that the water level was too low for the cooling requirements of the plant, though it wasn't a nuclear risk. Droughts are occurring in several parts of the world and wildfires in others. Indonesian authorities are battling extensive blazes across Sumatra. And the El Nino weather pattern runs the risk of complicating food production for much of the world.
WFP warns that drought, flooding, and extreme temperatures are already putting communities at risk, and El Nino could push at least 49 million more people into acute food insecurity by the end of 2027.
Fires and droughts making headlines today are creating new realities that the UN says the world needs to prepare for.
So, from more record-breaking wildfires to food and water shortages, can we even prepare for what's to come? Joining me now to debate that and more are from Norfolk in the UK, co-director of the Climate Majority Project, Rupert Read. From London, director of the sustainability consultancy 8 Versa, Chris Hocknell. And from Denver, regional manager at Prodigy Wildfire Solutions and CEO of the Wildfire Defense Group, Thomas Guttry. Thank you all so much for being with me. Thomas, I'll start with you because as far as the wildfires we've been witnessing, they are so intense now that they are creating their own weather systems. And now we have this perfect storm, really, of global warming and El Nino combined. So how much worse can it get? And logistically, can we prepare for it?
We can harden properties and defend structures. The problem you cite correctly is, it's a compounded problem. It's a problem, here in North America where the suppression has been practiced for decades. We have high fuel loads. We have global warming. And we have human encroachment into regions where wildfire is endemic. It's a naturally occurring event. And so when you combine those elements, that's what creates, this risk of to life and property.
Right, and it is incredibly intense. But some still argue, particularly among politicians, that, this is only part of the natural El Nino cycle. Is that in part true? And if so, then how long will that last before things get better?
I mean, I'm not a climate scientist, so I can't speak authoritatively about the history of climate change, but I think we can witness over the last several years the increased frequency and intensity of these fires.
Mm-hmm. Even before El Nino arrived. So let me ask Rupert about that then. Go ahead, Rupert.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I wanted to let your audience know something about what this El Nino thing is that we're talking about here. So we've got the backdrop, right, of enhanced disastrous levels of human-caused global overheating. And now on top of that, we've got this El Nino system developing, which is going to be a huge impact on our weather worldwide for the next year or so. And what is the El Nino? Basically what it is a periodic event where the Pacific erupts a load more heat into the atmosphere from itself. And something which we should notice is that the Earth is suffering from what is called a massive energy imbalance. In other words, for a long time, because of human-caused global overheating, more and more energy has been being stored in the atmosphere and in the oceans. And that may help people to understand why it's likely that this coming El Nino is going to be way off the scale, the biggest one by far that we have ever seen. In other words, yes, the El Nino is a naturally occurring phenomenon, but it is being doubly rocket-fueled by human-caused dangerous climate change. And honestly, the world is so not ready for what's going to come over the next year. We are in only the very early stages of this El Nino event. In Europe and Asia and Africa, we're barely noticing it yet. Over the next year, it's going to raise temperatures a lot higher, which is going to mean more huge precipitation events, but it's also going to mean simply higher temperatures and, again, a propensity for there to be more wildfires, more heat waves, more heat storms and droughts. And that's really what we're contending with here. a natural weather system which has been driven into something very unnatural as a result of human-caused climate change.
And then also, Rupert, you know, when we look at the aftermath, when we look back, for example, at places like Maui, a tropical island that suffered one of the most severe wildfires in U.S. history, can there even be adaptation now? Because the ecology has been changed, not just in the aftermath, but it was changed initially to cater to our agricultural and developmental demands as well.
Yeah, well, look, Andrea, we have no choice but to adapt because we are in this very difficult, deadly age of consequences, which is a result of our collective actions over the last 100 years or so. But you are right to imply that when we talk about adaptation, it's quite wrong to think about this as a process which is going to be in any way easy. Human beings are very adaptable creatures, but we are trying to adapt now to something which is outside our natural climate and ecological niche. So the kind of adaptation that we're going to have to do, it has to be very serious, what we in the Climate Majority Project call strategic adaptation. Or another way to think about it is transformative adaptation. We're going to have to roll with the punches that are coming at us in quite unpredictable ways. A case in point is the El Nino that's coming. As I've already said, it's very likely it's going to bring extreme high temperatures. It's also very likely that it's not only going to bring drought and wildfires, but also extreme flooding events. Now, if you go from one of those to the other, obviously it's very, very different kinds of conditions that you're then trying to adapt to. So what governments need to do and what individuals and households and communities need to do, because this is crucially a matter of how we face this as neighborhoods and as communities. We can't face this as individual households alone.
Okay.
What we need to do is to seek to adapt in ways that are actually rising to the gravity of the challenge that we are facing. And that means, for example, if we're thinking about the storm side of this for a moment, that means, for example, that we're going to need nature-based solutions. We're going to need ecosystem-based adaptational solutions, not just solutions that we can implement at the level of protecting individual households.
Right, because we have to adapt and the land will have to adapt. So let me get Chris's take then on, the analyses you've just heard, as well as whether measures are actually being taken now. As, you know, if we use the example of Maui again, as they continue to rebuild, are they taking the measures that need to be taken for better prevention and to restore the ecology the way it should be, or are they just returning to the same models that, you know, contributed to the fires in the first place?
I think the concept of adaptation is a mixed one, but generally across the board, you can almost say it's chronically under-delivered and underappreciated. So I would really echo some of the things that Rupert said there, that adaptation is one of the things that I'm particularly focused on and we're particularly focused on in our organisation, and it's just chronically neglected. And you know, if we're talking about Europe in the context of the wildfires, for example, you know, there are policies and regulations in France which are probably more effective than other places. There's an enforcement issue there. I think fundamentally, though, we're not taking this seriously. It's not at the top of the agenda. A lot of it also requires resources. It requires capital and intellectual and cognitive bandwidth, which is just not given. Fundamentally, we're off in probably an order of magnitude in terms of the amount of time, effort, and consideration we need to be giving this problem. And that's not just the wildfires; that's everything to do with climate adaptation, which is completely off the mark. I think sometimes we're mitigation, so reducing the impacts of climate change via controlling greenhouse gas emissions versus the adaptation, they're kind of seen as the same bucket of money, and they're kind of fighting for resources, and one is begetting the other, which is a fundamental problem. And chronically, we're not treating this adaptation concept with enough seriousness whatsoever. But I would say, in the context of the wildfires, I don't want to rob ourselves of agency, because I think that's also one of the downfalls of broader climate and environmental efforts is there is a kind of sometimes a deterministic, quite kind of doom-laden perspective, and I don't think that that needs to be the case. And there's a lot of things that we can do to move the needle in and around wildfires and management and improving the situation. We actually need to do it and take it seriously.
Let me come back to Thomas then. Rupert, I know you had a comment, but I'll come to you in a minute because I'd like to ask about the immediate fighting of the fires that are still, perpetuating throughout North America and Europe as well. Because there's the question about the fire suppression methods that you alluded to earlier. Some of those are actually backfiring now. And even if we look at fighting the current fires with aerial water drops, we were talking about France earlier. They're having an issue now with dropping the water from helicopters only to have half of it evaporate or more in midair.
Sure. Well, I mean, here in North America, we practice for decades wildfire suppression, and where we our focus was preventing wildfires from occurring altogether. The result of that is this natural phenomenon was being mitigated, which has caused decades of increased fuel loads. So now when we have fires in areas where there haven't been fires for years, the fires are quite intense. Couple that with climate change and what we're seeing here in America with political and budgetary issues and things that have decreased our resources for combating fires. We do have a looming crisis here. I think this year has been particularly bad with wildfires occurring the last couple of years in areas where it was never considered to be endemic, and yet we're having major events.
Yeah, you talk about the increasing fuel loads. There's also this, and I'm going to try my best to pronounce it correctly, pyrocumulonimbus clouds being created that can actually puncture the stratosphere because of the heat of these fires, and then they generate their own lightning that can actually create new fires while these almost unaddressable ones are being responded to. So let me come to Rupert, though, because Thomas was mentioning some of the political issues. And Rupert, part of the political response that we've seen to wildfires in North America has meant President Trump, threatening further tariffs on Canada for smoke entering the United States, while we have both Canada and the United States still proposing to increase production of fossil fuels. And those are just a few examples of the strange response, if I can characterize it as that. So how badly does that in itself bode for how governments are responding?
So the politics is looking incredibly bad. Let's not understate this. Trump is, of course, an absolute extreme of absurdity and climate denial here. Unbelievable of him to threaten Canada for something which is partly, of course, caused by the United States itself through its nature-destructive policies, through its reckless oil-burning policies. But we look around the world and very few governments are actually anywhere near stepping up to the mark here. If we look at my own country, the UK, for example, we have a new Prime Minister here, Andy Burnham, and some people have been thinking, well, surely he's going to be better than the old Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who was very unpopular. But so far, Burnham on the climate and on nature has been, if anything, even worse than Starmer. In other words, Burnham is talking about burning more oil and gas from the North Sea. And Burnham's level of action to step up to protect the British public against these terrible wildfires and droughts that we're now experiencing in the hottest summer that we've ever had in this country. Burnham's response is absolutely pitiful. The only thing he has said so far is he encourages retailers not to sell disposable barbecues. That's it. We have to move, as Chris said, to a whole nother level of seriousness here. As citizens, as governments, as a planet, we have to face that we have caused a crisis which is devastating for us already, is going to get a lot more devastating. Until we move to tackle the root causes of that crisis, it will go on getting worse forever. And in the meantime, we must adapt with, as Chris said, orders of magnitude more resources, a mission-like seriousness. We must seek to protect ourselves together. And that means people in a house or a street or a community or a region or a country or ultimately a planet. We must seek to protect ourselves together. Otherwise, the kind of casualty figures that we've been seeing this summer will grow and grow. For example, I'll just make this final crucial point. The rich country at the heart of Europe, Germany, in these heat waves this summer has suffered approximately 10,000 people dying from them. I don't need to remind you, I'm sure that that's more than twice the number that perished in the World Trade Center casualty, which was such a huge thing a generation ago now. And these numbers, as I say, will keep getting worse unless we move to address the root causes and unless we move to adapt strategically to protect ourselves. And governments that fail to do that, they will be judged and they will in due course be thrown out.
They will be judged, but now we have the question as to whether it's too late. Because, Chris, I mean, one of the other factors we've seen, for example, are rivers, entire rivers drying up. In Hungary, they couldn't even cool nuclear reactors for power generation. Plus, we're looking at building, this is just one aspect. Going forward, we're going to need, according to what the public demands, energy-intensive data centers to fuel, AI and new computer systems that are right now being built. And that for as much as, the residents of these areas might be complaining about those data centers, the truth is the public consumer is using them. So how is any of this really sustainable if the root causes are addressed or not? Going forward with new technology, new developments, and new needs, including air conditioning, what are we supposed to do?
This is at the nub of a lot of the fundamental arguments and debates going on, I think, in this sector. I think one of the problems we have is that, for me, this a kind of a degrowth mindset, or it doesn't work, because I think you're running up so hard against human expectations, behaviour, etc. So, in the context of, say, energy, we actually need more energy, but it needs to be sustainable energy. It needs to be an enormous build out. But like you talk about the chronic failings with, say, water availability. Example is the UK, which is from we've got bans on certain types of water consumption covering probably about half of the country right now, and it hasn't rained for I want to say maybe 3 months, something like that. Now, most people probably consider Britain to be not the most sunny, dry, and glamorous tropical place. It used to be lush and green for a reason, because it's a wet and rainy place. However, just to give you some kind of reference point to how severe the negligence is in terms of infrastructure and adaptation and resilience, the UK hasn't built a reservoir since 1992, I think. So we have a chronic shortage of available water. We have everything's turning yellow, and the plants are dying. We just don't seem to take this thing seriously, and I think governments would much rather not have to confront it, because I suppose, as Rupert was saying there, that it is this. I would probably put the adaptation approach in terms of infrastructure and new, more secure and more sustainable forms of energy, etc. It's something on an equivalent to kind of a post-war or war footing, or maybe something like we saw in response to the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
Is this kind of Herculean kind of pivot, which requires departments, massive funding, real mission-orientated approach, and it's just categorically missing. Yeah. So it's kind of to the point of extreme neglect, really. That's it. But there are solutions. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me just finish with Thomas. We only have a minute and a half left, because Thomas, I mean, as an American consumer, sure, you're based in Denver. The American consumer that many still argue drives the global economy, they may be in large part ignoring the issues that are driving climate change, according to scientists. There's still a lot of denial among the supporters of the government, the current administration right now. But what's going to happen? Because climate scientists are insisting that we are looking at shortages in food production as well as, water supply. What is that going to lead to for Americans in particular? What are you expecting on that front going forward with this global crisis?
Well, I mean, I think we're already seeing it. The number of fires that we've witnessed in North America this summer alone, and the intensity and size of those fires, and the property loss that's already been experienced, should be an eye opener. That this is a problem that's not going away, and you're correct. We're faced with water supply issues and other risks as well due to climate change. But there are, just so that we're not completely doomsayers here, there are methods and tactics that can be employed to help protect assets and allow people to evacuate areas, with some peace of mind that their property and valuables and what have you will be have a chance of being protected. But the overarching problem is one that isn't going to go away quickly. We're not going to rake the forest and eliminate wildfire.
Okay, Tom, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with me, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media. Do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.